Welcome to today's video. Today we're going to look at how to write a focus group report and make recommendations to make a legal document better. This video is the fifth and final video in this series about how to field test legal documents. In today's video, we're going to look at best practices in plain language report writing, how to determine how well your document did in terms of meeting your initial expectations, and how to share the focus group findings and recommendations in a way that's efficient and easy for everyone. My name is Maria Mindlin, and I'm a linguist and readability expert at Transcend. Transcend is a small language services and translation company in California. I'm working on this video project with Anna Heinlein of LawNY and Mary Zimmerman of Idaho Legal Aid. This project was funded by an LSC TIG grant, and this same LSC grant funded other plain language and readability tools that you can find at writeclearly.org. To recap, in the previous videos, we've learned how to prepare and finalize your text for testing, how to create an instrument that you're going to use in the focus group test, how to pre-test, which lets you rehearse and improve your text and your instrument, how to recruit participants, select your focus group team, and how to actually conduct your test. Let's start with how to write your report. As usual, we like to make things as easy as possible for you and ourselves. So we recommend that you start off using the focus group report template that you can find at writeclearly.org. It has all the different sections that you need to address in a standard focus group report, and it'll make it easy and fast for you to do your first few reports. We use Word or other application that you can use track changes in. This allows the people that were in your focus group team to very easily edit, modify the other team members' reported findings and recommendations. It's really important that the other two team members get a chance to review the initial draft within 24 hours. We've talked about this before, about how easy it is to forget some details that may be important to improve the actual document. So we like to try and write the report right away within a few hours, in no case later than 24 hours. And then we want the other two team members to have an opportunity to edit, review, contribute using track changes within another 24 hours to make sure that their memories are fresh and they can really contribute in a way that was faithful to what happened in the actual focus group. When the lead author is finished with the report, incorporating the other members' contributions and edits, then we want to give everyone involved with the report a final chance to review it before we finalize it. So let's look at the various parts of the report template. First, we will accumulate, as time goes on, a series of focus group reports. So we find it helpful to have them all set up in the same way. It gives you that habituated readability facility to be able to find things very quickly. So we set ours up this way. We always start with a document title. In this case, you have language access rights, and here is usted tiene derechos lingüísticos. This focus group test was done in Spanish, so we'll be reporting on that one. We always want to make sure right at the top we are capturing what the author's main objectives were for this document. And this is one part that it's really important to spend some time with and make sure that, well, before we write anything, we should ask ourselves, why are we writing this and what specifically do we want it to accomplish? We'll use these statements, these objectives, to measure the success of our document. So going back to what the group that authored the original document that we took to testing, the goal was to create an attractive, easy to read flyer that effectively informs LEPs, limited English proficient speakers, NEPs, non-English speakers, about their language rights. It would be a flyer that also gives LEPs and NEPs a tool to tell agencies that they should give them an interpreter or translated materials. And the flyer would also give them guidance about where the LEPs and NEPs could look for help if their language rights were denied. So just going over these goals again, as you recall, we had quite a teeny little half-page flyer, but we have some pretty hefty goals. It has to accomplish 3 quite distinct things. It has to be informative about their rights. It has to serve as a tool that the LEPs and NEPs can use to give someone so that they can get the language services that they need. And quite separately from that, it has to explain how they report any non-compliance if they go to an agency and they don't get the language services that they need. So these are 3 big goals that we have for this one small half-page document. Okay, let's carry on with what's in the template. The next part that we do is we describe our methodology. At some point, someone will ask you, well, where did you do this focus group, and who was there, and who acted as the moderator, or what were the ages of the participants? So in this 1 or 2 page report, you're going to have a nice, very efficient summary of everything that you'll need to be able to summarize the environment of the focus group. So we just simply use text that is in our template and we modify it to make it work. We have a date. We say what language we did the group in. At Transcend, most of our focus groups are in English, but because we're also a certified translation agency, there are sometimes that materials are created first in the target language. So we also do focus groups in those languages as well. So when it was, what was tested, we talk about where it was. Often most of the time, we do our focus groups in our office, which is convenient. We're in a small town, so it ends up being convenient for us as well as convenient for the people that come to us. But in this case, it ended up being most convenient to work in the back room of a little hair salon in town. And that was the place where we recruited people from. So because we knew everyone knew how to get there, it just seemed to be the easiest way for us to have the focus group by going to them. And then in terms of what happened at the focus group, this sounds pretty mundane, that we ask them the questions on the instrument, but sometimes other things may happen for something unexpected. You had to move, there were some last minute questions added, whatever it was. So this is the place that you would explain what happened. Here, nothing beyond the going through the instrument actually happened. The next part of our template is to talk about who was there in terms of doing the testing, the focus group team, as well as the participants. So here we talk about who acted as the moderator, who was the recorder, and who was the observer. And because this was done in Spanish, it was also important to give a bit of information about the language qualifications, my language qualifications, in that I'm a court certified Spanish interpreter. Okay, here in the next part, we're explaining where we got our participants from, that we paid them, how much we paid them, and who they were. We had 8 participants in all, and 6 were female and 2 were male. And then we had ages that ranged from 13 to 83. In this particular focus group, we didn't deliberately recruit children, but one of the women came with her son. And as many of you know, immigrants in this country often rely on their children, even when they're quite young, to guide them through many aspects of society that they might not understand, or related to a language that they don't understand but their children do. So it was unexpected, but we felt it was useful to have this teenage boy join us in the focus group test. And of course, none of them had seen this flyer before, and we didn't talk about the topic or anything related to the topic with them, so they really came in with fresh eyes. In the next part of our report, we give a bit of information about the education and language proficiency. So even if this had been a test that was done entirely in English, we'd also like to give some information about language proficiency. As you recall, even for all English, we want to make sure that we get people of different language backgrounds. So you ideally wanted to have include someone with somewhat limited English and someone with fairly fluent English, but who was from whose primary language was not English. So in this case, we were sort of working backwards, because this flyer was for people who didn't speak English well enough to access the services that they needed. So that's what we went for when we were recruiting. So 3 of our participants spoke very little English, and 4 spoke a bit of English, and they could get by with the most important things in their exchanges with people. 1 spoke English well, none spoke English very well. And here we have just a summary of what their educational, the highest grade level that they had attained. The next part of the focus group report is to say how long it took, and to also memorialize whether we were able to get through all of the questions or not, if any other questions were asked, if there was anything unusual, unexpected. And in this case, we covered all of the questions in the instrument. We would attach the instrument to the report, so that if someone is wondering about, at this point, well, what did they ask and how many questions were there, this will be attached to the report. And then we talk about our findings and the suggestions that either the group made or that we made after our recommendations, after listening to the group's suggestions. So we've talked quite a bit about reading interest in a document, that we know that people will have an easier time with a document if they know, if the title reveals what it's about and who it's for. So these are the two key questions that we always want to ask in the beginning. Here's what happened with those questions. When we asked all of the participants what this particular flyer was about, all of them said it was about a person's right to an interpreter. And here I want to stress that they said it was about the right to an interpreter. We'll be looking at the language access card in just a moment, but please recall that the original card really focused on language access rights, interpreter, translation, reporting, a number of things. In the mind of the participants, it was about an interpreter, that you have the right to an interpreter, you can ask for an interpreter, you have the right to be able to understand better, and that the offices can't deny you an interpreter. So we can feel confident that that part, the interpreter part of our objective was reached here. When we asked the participants who this flyer was for, they said things like anyone who needs help, people who don't understand English but need services, bosses who want to help their employees, everybody. So in their minds and from their perspective, many of whom live in communities that are largely limited English speaking or non-English speaking, this seemed to be all around a very useful tool. Next, we asked them if the flyer would be helpful for people who did not speak English. And quite interestingly, their responses were mixed. 5 of them said yes, that it could help them to obtain a number of services, health care, understanding documents before you sign them, being able to participate in children's schooling, or to be able to get help at court or go to the police. But they were also very quick at saying that they had some reservations about how helpful it was. So without any prompting, they were very worried about some of the words in Spanish that they found to be too difficult, and from their perspective, perhaps didn't really fit in with the document. They felt that this little flyer that we had was overly complicated and unnecessarily detailed. One of the things that was just uniform was that they would hope that people who worked in public offices in the United States would learn how to respond or recognize the phrase no hablo inglés or hablo español. So that was very interesting. So far in our report, we're seeing that it's met the need of telling people that they have the right to an interpreter. And now we're starting to get a sense of some of it is too difficult and too complicated, and we're seeing that they're not understanding all of the parts of this flyer. Here we set up a theoretical situation to see what they could find, what type of information or guidance they could find on the card. And we asked them, what does this flyer tell you, and you being a person who doesn't speak English fluently, to do if you want to get a public service? Say you wanted to apply for food stamps, or you wanted to get help from the police. And at this point, most of the participants really were not able to understand that this flyer was also set up to be a tool that the LEP or NEP person would show this card to the person at the office so that they would read the part in English on the flip side, saying that I don't speak English, but I have the right to an interpreter, and citing the particular statute. So it took some time for a couple of people to say that they didn't mention the card at all. They said that you should go to the office where you want the services, or just tell them no hablo inglés. So the aspect of people using this as a tool was completely lost on these 8 people. Next, we wanted to find out about whether they would be able to understand the reporting part of it. So if an agency didn't comply with the language access guidelines, would they be able to report it or find the number where they could get help? And so we asked them, we showed them the card and said, well, what is this number for? And again, it was interesting to see that the vast majority of them, 6 of 8, said that the words, the Language Access Coalition, which is a mouthful if you don't speak English, and the organization name was left in English because it was a name that the organization wants the different language communities to know them by. And that saying, call the Language Access Coalition, really prevented them from understanding who were they calling, what were they calling, what was this? And so that part also was pretty much lost on them. It was only the boy, the 13-year-old boy, who was the one who was most fluent in English and probably most acculturated to the way that American help documents are set up, understood what it was and what it was for. And so they huddled together a bit, and after this young man suggested something about what the phone number was for, then they all got together and said, well, yes, we guess this is what you would do if they don't give you an interpreter. Also, if you remember on this card, we had an opportunity to call, to text to the word denied, and we wanted to see if they would see that on the card, if they would understand what that was for. And here again, and so our age range was 13 to, I think it was 83 or 93 at any rate, but most of the other people were 30s, 40s, perhaps young 50s. And so we asked them to, this young man, to not share yet until the others had a chance to look at that word and figure out what it was for and what they would do with that. And importantly, none of them understood what was going on with this denied and the idea of texting. This also was lost on them. Next, we asked them what they would do if they had questions about their language rights. And again, they were a bit bewildered, and this had to do with the resource help part of the document. Having the words Language Access Coalition there and having information about computers there was quite difficult. And also, this may have something to do with cultural competency, about how people respond in different cultural communities when they need help or they need support. So they said, well, if I wanted to learn more about my language rights, I would call a friend, I would go to the library, I would try to go to some place for help. And then the teenage boy said that he would look online. At that point, Several people in the group said that they didn't think it was a good idea to tell their particular community to look for help online. They felt that there were a lot of people in the adult age group who either didn't have a computer or didn't know how to use a computer, including a smartphone type of computer. So they felt that it it wasn't useful for them. So this continues what we were talking about in the previous slide, that this may not have been a good fit in terms of cultural competence for the Spanish language groups in our area. I don't want to overly generalize, but there is some data to suggest that there is a gap both by age and both by language communities as to how people get information and how available computers are and how hard or easy it is for people to access computers. Um, so also in their minds, their they thought of their needs not as being computer based or computer solvable, but that they needed a person. And they said sometimes desperately needed a person, describing a hospital situation or something like that, that had basic oral communication skills. And at times they might have needed sight translation. Sight translation, of course, being if someone has a document that they translate out loud rather than providing it in written form. So, one of our objectives was about if the LEPs and NEPs would be able to use the little wallet card tool that was part of this flyer, and it was set up so that if you weren't getting the language services you need, you just showed this, and on the flip side they would see it in English, that this was a card that stated your legal right to have language support. It told the office worker what she should do if they weren't able to get you language support, to speak to a supervisor or to contact the coalition. So when we asked our group what this part was for, we only got two responses that seemed to be spot on. The first one said, keep it in your wallet, which was good that they knew it was a wallet card. But only two said that you would show it to someone. You would show it to the office where you're getting services. So it wasn't really clear to most of the people what that part was for. We've talked before about having people take out a yellow highlighter and highlighting words that some people, maybe not them, but some people might find difficult. So we really got a wonderful list of words from the group. And as you can see here, we collected a nice list of them. One of the things that we do in our report is we say what words would be better. How could we say this in a way that would be easier for people to understand? So we report the words, we report the suggested solutions, and then finally we report what we think should be done to resolve this difficult word issue. And as mentioned before, this is just a treasure of information. You start to collect words and see some of the same words come up again and again, and you get a sense of what sort of words a particular community or a community or non-lawyers find difficult. Well, one of the things that really came up as a big problem in this particular flyer was that Language Access Coalition were big, seemingly potentially important words, but they didn't know what it meant, weren't sure why it was there, and it really prevented the comprehension of what they were supposed to do. The other part of it, and we've talked about this before, is we wanted to mimic or to represent the you have language access rights. And, of course, looking back, you can say, well, language access rights, language rights, that's a bit legalese if you think about it. If you were to tell someone, well, you have language rights, they would probably think, what do they mean? So it's one of those phrases like saying you have certain civil rights. Well, you have a general idea, but you really don't know specifically what it means. So that was a problem. And in Spanish, it's a bit harder than it is in English to say language rights and language access. So that whole approach became problematic and difficult, and in fact made much of the Spanish information inaccessible or difficult to access, which of course is not what we want with a language access flyer. We asked them about format. What did they like? What didn't they like? What would they change if they could change anything? And so recall most of the people were between late 20s, 30s to early 50s. And four of them said they just couldn't read it all unless they had their glasses on. So definitely a change in font size. They wanted to see stronger colors. They had some very specific requests about the uh, bubbles, the cartoon language bubbles at the top, we'll look at in just a minute. And they wanted this no hablo inglés again to appear on the Spanish card. They had some very nice ideas about how to move things around. One of the participants said that generally in his experience, when you see the H to represent a hospital, it's almost always in blue. So it was hard to make that connection because we hadn't presented it in blue. So as you can see, there's some very specific and extremely helpful information about things that you can easily correct, improve, move. You can take this document that you know is accomplishing some things, and you have really specific information about how to make the other things work or work better. Next, we asked them if what they felt about the length. Was it too long, too short, or just right? And all of them thought it was a good length. And in general, I would say that confirms feedback that we get in most of our focus groups, that people prefer to have a short bit of information, meaning a flyer, a brochure, um, a one page or one sheet on both sides, and the ability to go somewhere else if they want more information. So an initial short piece of information seems to be what most people like. But almost all of them felt that the text was too dense and too small, and that there needed to be some things changed in order to make it easier to read and easier to use. So here's our card again, and it looks quite messy with all these things over it, but the reason that I'm showing it to you in this way is because we always try to do things in the fastest way, and it's really quite a departure with the way focus group reports and um, the way people used to report focus groups. So we just go into the text with our Adobe tools and take out things that they wanted to take out, show where things that they wanted to move, and make it really instantly accessible We do the same in English so that on the English translation so that our clients who don't speak Spanish would understand. But let me just quickly go over some of the things that they said. The most important thing that they said, in my opinion, was that they wanted to get rid of linguísticos. They didn't want a simpler word for language like idioma. They felt strongly, all 8 of them, that their need was for an interpreter and sometimes sight translation. And I took this to mean that it would appeal to their natural interest if we told them that they had the right to an interpreter. At some point, we could add information that they also had a right to translations if they needed it. But for them and their needs, they needed to know about having an interpreter. That's necesito intérprete. That's the language they wanted to see on the title. They also didn't like having the English there. It didn't make any sense to them that it would be there. In this section here, of course, in retrospect, it's easy to see that it needed a bit more work, but they felt that this text piece here, which was sort of the preface to what to do if you need more help or more information, was visually disconnected from these sort of bullet points below. Again, remember that reporting to Language Access Coalition, this was not the way to do it for them. We needed to find a different solution, and we worked with our client to talk about what would we do here. Would we say coalición? Would we say call us? Would we say call LAC? How could we change it so that their program name wouldn't be an obstacle for people calling? This part here about sending a text message being denied was not a good cultural competency match. And this part here about language rights had the same issue as the title. The language rights was vague for them and not felt to be very helpful. If we move on, we can see that we had some really great suggestions about the H being in blue so that people would recognize it more easily. Look at this suggestion here. I think it's very nice. So it says, tiene derecho a un intérprete gratuito. You have the right to a free interpreter who will protect the privacy of your information. And they said, well, why don't we just say someone who will protect your privacy or keep your privacy, you would say in Spanish. So make it shorter. And everyone seemed to like that. Other important things. This part here about the preguntas, that was, this whole section was hard for them. First, because we had this little bubble in English here. And second, because in the original version, the group authoring this text thought it was very important to reference Title VI so that the staff worker who would the office worker who would receive this card would feel that they would understand that they were legally required to follow this instruction. But in the hands of the LEP or NEP person, it was that they started reading this area and they thought, oh, this is definitely not for me. What do I know about Título 6? And not only Título 6, these Roman numerals weren't easily recognized as Roman numerals by people with a more limited education. So it was a stumbling block that made the information below hard to access. So we have some really great information here, but some things that are preventing the readers from being able to see all of it and use all of it. So I'd like to go back to this finding about the text being too dense and the text being too small. I think there's often a gap between authors of a document and the people who read them. And of course, just visual accessibility and a decent font size and a decent font is very important. But also the amount of information that's there and the particular goals that you have for the document, how many pieces of key information you want the person to learn, can make something quite complex. So this was dense both in terms of text density, and it was dense in terms of what we wanted to achieve. So you remember we wanted them to understand that they had language access rights. We wanted them to understand that this was a card, a little wallet card that they could show. They could show the English wallet card to the office worker so that they could demand their language access rights. And we wanted it to be a way that they could learn how to report any offices that were not complying with these guidelines. So a small little card, but we had a lot of objectives, and that's a good thing to remember, that it's challenging to meet so many objectives from just one particular piece of information. Here is the English card that I wanted to show you. This is how we present the information if we have clients who don't speak the target language. We want to show them exactly what has changed. So we would use track changes and show them what had been taken out and what was put in, so that they could see exactly the equivalent. As you can see, there weren't that many changes, but again, we have the key ones. They wanted to say that we have a right to an interpreter. Keep your information private rather than protecting the privacy of your information. Just make it a little bit more direct. They wanted some things moved around. They wanted to say the law instead of Title VI, because none of them had any idea what Title VI or B, or they weren't sure what that was about. So some very basic, good suggestions. As you can see in this next version, things are getting leaner and more direct. And in my opinion, the feedback from the focus group really helped us to make this particular flyer much more successful. We didn't implement all of their suggestions, but as you can see, there were many. Remember before we were talking about how the reporting prompt was too visually separated from actually what you had to do. So we connected that more. We changed Language Access Coalition to LAC, and then we put a little tiny thing down there in case people would read it. And we used icons to separate out texting and calling, and this seemed to work better as well. And in terms of the URL where they're reporting, we changed that to interpreter, which again was a better match with what they needed. And here, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this earlier. The idea that the interpreter was free was very important to this group. If you tell someone you have the right to an interpreter, but you have to pay, and as a former interpreter, it can be really expensive. So adding this free here was very important. Another change that you can see is all these icons here became blue. And I think that was a very good suggestion that we got and would probably use moving forward. And in this particular wallet card area, they had found the text too dense and too hard to read. So we made the important things a lot bigger. We used more color, and we changed Title VI to say the law, and made this information also, we rephrased it so it was a bit simpler. So their input really cleaned up the card and made the information, revealed the information, and made it easier for them to understand it and to find what they needed. This is the previous version of the card. I think one of the things difficult about a slideshow is hard to see things side by side. But as you can see, this card previously, it would be so easy to look at it and say, oh man, this is really great. It's got good colors, it's got good graphics, it has the proper information, it's written at the 5th grade level, and you could feel really confident that someone could go out and use this. Let's translate this into 1,000,000 languages. But doing this one focus group helped us to identify some of the weaknesses, not only in the Spanish, but about the structure of the card and what language rights really meant to people on the ground. So the changes that we were able to make in this area by connecting this more and simplifying it, by simplifying what it says about Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, by making these icons in easier language and also more visually identifiable by using a different color. In every area, we took something that was a piece of information that was okay, accomplishing some of the goals, and we made it much better. And with just one focus group that took an hour and 10 minutes. We're at the end, and thank you very much for watching this video series. I really hope it's been useful, and I hope it's apparent about how helpful it is to get feedback from focus groups. In this last example, we saw that the information that the focus group brought was so unexpected and so vital, yet when you hear it, it makes so much sense. And the changes that they gave us will really help us in terms of creating for additional information for them in the future too. So the specifics, just to review what we learned today, is write your report as soon as possible. Use a template if you want to make it easy on yourself, and using a template helps it makes it easy for other people in your office too, because they'll know where to find certain bits of information. Using track changes to make sure everybody gets input on the report, finalizing your reports and keeping them in a common area so that other people in your office can go into them and access the findings that you have, especially keeping track of difficult words and words that they prefer. And last, this idea of being able to make recommendations in a way that's easy. On our end, we found that using the Adobe commenting tools and the sticky notes has made it a very easy process rather than long reports and long phone calls. So it has been quite efficient for us. So we're at the end, and I thank you very much for listening to the video today, and I wish you lots of luck in your focus groups. Thank you.